Hello YouTube friends. This is the first video in a series where we will be building a dynamic router in PHP. And to start, I've cleared out some of our folders and files a little bit just to give us a clean slate. For those of you following along, in fact, you would need to be up to speed about this point, so maybe have to go back and watch some previous videos. But for those of you who already know enough about coding, you don't have to. Anyhow, so from the previous video, I've emptied out any classes that we've had to give us a clean slate. This is a fresh project, and our little example tests that we were doing in the previous video are gone as well. So we're starting clean there. I also had an info file and a test file for PHP that were remnants from some very early videos. So I simply just have our files.php, which is this file manager right here in our root directory. I have run tests, which is the file that we made in the last series to be able to run tests. Of course, of our index, we have phpMyAdmin, and that's all we've got right now. Of course, I still have my terminal running. Don't think we'll need that in this series, but you know, it's there in case we need it. Actually, we will need it because we will be making changes to the Nginx configuration file, but we'll get to that later. So let's get started. I did make one small change to our run tests PHP file, and it's for anybody who needs to display the errors in their browser. Any errors that you would normally just log into SSH for in case you need them to display in the browser. And actually, it's a little bit nice in this case because we're running tests. It's kind of a pain to have to SSH in and pull up the logs and parse through them. So I added these 3 lines to our run tests.php file, and that will just spit out errors if we mess something up. That'll give us that immediate feedback that we need to make those changes. So that's all. Feel free to pause the video, make those changes really quick, and let's get started. All right, so in any good test-driven development scenario, what's the first thing you do, guys? What is it? I'm waiting for an answer. Got a comment down below, I'm gonna wait. We write tests. Thank you, user number 35 number whatever. So let's write a test and go into the tests folder to do it, right? New item, file. We are going to call this router tests.php. Create now, click in, advanced editor, open and close. In fact, to save a little bit of time, because I did go a little bit deep with this test, so I'm just going to copy and paste what I've got and walk you guys through it instead of doing what I normally do, which is to try to type and talk at the same time. And we'll try something different today. We'll do a little bit of copy and paste and see how you guys like that. Maybe you hate it. Let me know. So anyhow, we've pasted our class, our PHP file here. And I'm going to go ahead and save this really quick just so it's there. And it's class router test. We have our construct where we're going to require in the classes /router.php. Let's go ahead and make that file so that it will at least work there. We can, you know, for fun, let's just go ahead and run the tests so you guys can see what happens. Yeah, so there we go. Our 3 lines of code that we added to our run tests.php are working very well. It's telling us that the file that we're trying to require in does not exist. So let's go into our file manager. We'll create another tab. Classes, new item, file, router.php. And we'll go ahead and at least put in the shell here of code that we're going to need, just so we can kind of write our tests and, you know, get them displaying and failing and all that, and not spitting out too many errors. So we'll get our PHP tags, and this is going to be called the router class. So class router. right? Public function get route. So we're going to start with this function right here. This will be the first of at least a couple. I don't want to say many because I try to keep things simple. Hopefully we don't need a whole lot of functions. But this will be the function that we're going to work on first, which is get route. We're going to basically take these two parameters. We're going to have the URI, or what you might call the path, that is sent in the request in the URL. And you're going to have a list of routes. And you're going to use the URI that gets sent in, that first parameter, and scan through a list of routes to find the ones that match and then return the route that matches. Now, obviously for static routes, this is incredibly simple, and you guys will see that's like not even worth writing a class over. But when we get into dynamic routes, however, that is where having this class will be useful. So we've got our basic function here. We're going to save, and we'll come back to our tests. In fact, let's just run the test and see. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Yeah, that's about where we're going to be until we start writing code for the actual router. So let's look at our tests. We have our construct where we're requiring in the class for the router. And then we've got our function test get route, which is that function we wrote over there in the router class. Of course, we create an instance of the router. We set up a list of routes that we're going to test. So these are, or no, excuse me. This is the list of routes. So if you had set this up and these were routes you wanted on your application, this is that. This is the list of routes that we're going to basically put into that second parameter right here, all these routes. And then we jump straight into testing. We got tests 1 through 10. And the very first one is just a simple get route, and the path is slash. We throw the routes variable in. Then we continue down here. You'll see we're doing user slash 1, 2, 3, 4. If you come up and look, you'll see that's a dynamic route where we have :ID. I've decided to use colon. It's fairly standard. I've seen routers use colons to designate a variable section of a path. So that's how we're going to do it today. You'll see how to do it, and then if you decide you don't like colons, you can do it your own way. Use your own character. Yep. So there's user slash 1, 2, 3, 4 orders. That's going to be a static route. Order slash news, another static route. And then you got a couple dynamic routes right there. And then something that straight up just doesn't exist. So we'll see how the router handles that. We'll have to write some code to handle that. And then I've got some ambiguous ones here. If you look at this, I've got two routes that are slash ambiguous slash a variable. In this case, the top one's ID, the next one is test. Well, this is as it says. It's ambiguous. The router will not know based on the input. So if I put in right here, ambiguous slash 9999, it doesn't know whether to go to route with the ID or the test. It's too ambiguous. So how is our router going to handle that scenario? And then of course I've got a couple more ambiguous slash static. So it should be able to handle that. Should be able to handle static routes just fine. It's just the variable routes that are ambiguous. And then you have that last route right there where the first section is just as ambiguous as those first two with the dynamic routes for ambiguous. But it also has a slash test, oops, messed that up, at the end there. So that decreases the ambiguity. Yeah. It should be able to, verify that. And you can see in this line right here, the router should be able to understand, oh, okay, yep, it is variable, but I understand that there's this extra path at the end. It is unique. I know how to handle this, so on, so forth. You guys with me so far? So these are our tests where we're running our class arrow function get route to access that function we're going to write. We're getting the results, and we're going to do some assertions. So pretty simple stuff. We have assert, we have our expression, we have what we expect, and we have our little courtesy message that we spit out to the browser so we kind of sort of can remember what we're testing. And so basically with test 1, I'm expecting it to return a route of / in that list. And you can see that in fact is a route. And then the test 2, where the request is user /1234, it should return the route user /:ID, and so on and so forth. And then we get down here to the something that does not exist. The router should spit out a route not found message. So that's in the expected column. And then you get down here into ambiguous, where I've kind of shifted things around a little bit confusingly, mostly because I wrote this beforehand, and you'll see why when we get into it. Yeah, so route not found for something that does not exist, and then the ambiguous static route, and then of course the ambiguous with the variable, and then another unique identifier at the end that's static. So what we should be able to get out of those. And then we get down here to the ambiguous test. And you can see that I'm expecting our getRoute function to return an array in this case. And so your use of this function will need to double check whether or not it's a string or an array. And obviously, if it's a string, you know it's a route. If it's not a string, then it's probably an error. And in this case, when we get that ambiguous route, it is going to spit out an error, or it's going to spit out an array that has these members. One is error, and it'll just say ambiguous routes matched. And then it'll list under the routes key in a indexed array the routes that got matched against that request, so that you can get that feedback of actually which routes our function picked up that are ambiguous to begin with. So that's our test. And if we run it, obviously, because we have no code, everything's failing. And then, of course, you get to the ambiguous section here, and because it is trying to access an array that's not there, we're getting these errors in PHP. So, all right, you guys ready? Tell you what, so this this video is already 13 minutes long. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this here, and then we will do the actual code for the router class in the next video. See you guys there.